Hi, everyone. Recently, I received a comment from someone on my videos that mentioned that Paul died a natural death according to the Alexandrinus, and that became the oldest Bible as of that time in 1625. And this epistle of First Clement that was found in it at the very end had actually been completely obliterated from any manuscript history prior to that time. And David Matthew was providing me a text that showed a radically different depiction of Paul's death as a martyr when the Alexandrinus does not show that at all. So now we're going to find out that where did this come from? Well, I've concluded it's not in any manuscripts other than the Alexandrinus is it, doesn't have it. And literally, once again, the only evidence you can deduce is that people made this up recently, putting in his death of martyrdom. And I'll show you why, because even Hoole mentions, well, you could use statements in the church history maybe to supplement it, but he didn't do it. Hoole, who did the major translation here, did not corrupt the text. He didn't corrupt Alexandrinus, but people after him and around him started doing it later and started adding all these extra words that make Paul a martyr. And prove me if I'm wrong. It's easy to do that. Just pull out find a manuscript different than the Alexandrinus of First Clement that actually can be translated with those missing words that you're going to see over and over again in many places and fooled poor David Matthews. So the question again, I just want to make it clear. Was David Matthew deceived, like many tens of thousands, by fraudulent words added to 1 Clement 5 to make Paul appear a martyr, where the canonical 1 Clement and Alexandrinus says Paul died a natural death? So again, First Clement was canon consistently from the beginning of the church, and then it just disappears entirely. And I'm going to suggest to you it actually disappears because of the words you're going to read, because these words were completely inconsistent with myths that were created in the late 300s that Paul had died a martyr. And these were written separately in different documents. So now 1 Clement became a liability. You can't endorse it because it's going to say Paul's not a martyr. Now, again, I want to tell you, I never got into this because I think it matters at all whether Paul's a martyr or not for purposes of knowing if he's valid or not. There are many. John didn't die a martyr, and he's still valid, so it doesn't change Paul's validity. But it just goes to show once more. This I had an interest because Polite Bribe movie claims that James set up Paul for being murdered by asking him to do a Nazirite vow in Acts 21, and he claimed that when Paul went to trial in front of Nero in Rome, that Nero killed him. And Jerome and Eusebius says that's false. He was acquitted of all charges. So the whole idea of Paul dying was because this Polite Bribe movie was claiming that James was basically a murderer by de facto through proxies of Paul by setting him up. And one of my defenses in that article I wrote years ago was no, it's impossible because he didn't even get killed and there was no trial where he lost. So, it might have been his intent if you prove that, which I dispute. But even if he had the intent, it didn't happen. So that's why I cared about it, and I still care about it. So this is a complete fraud after the fact, after the Alexandrinus comes out. So the First Clement had been completely suppressed as if it never existed. And you'll see, Hoole will say it's remarkable how every single copy was destroyed. And he says it's not an accident. And he comes up with a theory of why that happened. We'll go into that later. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure we know the issue and we know what I'm trying to suggest and prove. As we'll see. Now, this is the letter David Matthews sent to me, and I'm reading it, and you'll see this replicated in 4 or 5 places: the Ante-Nicene Fathers, the Catholic web pages, all these things where they say this. Well, I'm just going to tell you, the key words are suffered martyrdom. Paul suffered martyrdom. He departed to the place of glory due to him, owing to envy. Paul also. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. That's Peter. Okay. Let's make sure. Oh, here it is. Paul suffered martyrdom under the prefix. That thus was he removed from the world. And it doesn't say that in the original Alexandrinus. These are words that are added by somebody recently. recently, post 1625, when they translate it. This is how they present it to us. Again, prove to me if there's a text that has this, anybody. Because I digged and digged and digged, and all the texts like Syriac and whatever are discounted as having any meaningful portions, and nobody's ever published the Syriac translations at all, so it can't be that either. So I've eliminated everything possible according to what I've researched. So it could be something I don't know. So I'm waiting to see. Somebody put a comment there, comment there, or some scholar person let us know. But that's the evidence. The evidence is it's a made up words that are not there. So I want to just show you. The Alexandrinus was translated by a Mr. Hoole in the in the 1860s and 1870s books he came out with. And on the left is what David Matthews was told, and we're going to read it from here. It's much more legible, and then we're going to read the Alexandrinus. Well, actually, let's start with the Alexandrinus, and you'll understand what's at stake here, and then you'll understand why people would change things. Chapter 5, verse 5. Through envy, Paul too showed by example the prize that is given to patience. 7 times was he cast into chains. He was banished. He was stoned, having become a herald both in the east and in the west. He obtained the noble renown due to his faith. Example 5:7. And having preached righteousness to the whole world, and having come to the extremity of the west, Spain most likely, which is his intentions, and having borne witness before rulers, he departed at length out of the world and went to the holy place, having become the greatest example of patience. Okay, so that is the way you speak about the dead, people who've just died naturally. It's their departing from this earth. They're not removed. They've not been violently removed. That's how it's going to be changed. Look to the left. See, now he's violently removed and he suffered martyrdom. So that's all you have to do to change this to make him look like he's been killed and murdered or persecuted to death. Again, I don't really care for his merits. It's a lie. Don't make him more a hero than he really is by lying. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it's out there. Now, I'll state you what their defense is in a minute, why they think they can do this, because Hoole will mention it himself. So these are the key words. They don't belong there. They're not there. And now, Alexandrinus gives us, Hoole gives us some background on the Alexandrinus. I'll be right. So let's read Hoole's comments about the text itself. After AD 1140, the catena of evidence about any traces of evidence of the first Clement, which had been up to that time quite complete, ends abruptly. And the epistle apparently disappeared for about 5 centuries until 1628, at which date the Alexandrian manuscript was brought to England as a present to Charles I with Cyril Lucar, Patriarch first of Alexandria and then of Constantinople. And at the end of this manuscript, which is one of the oldest existing of the Bible and is generally assigned to the middle of the 5th century, so about 450, the Epistle to the Corinthians by Clement, together with a fragment commonly known as the second epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, was discovered. So in the next page, Hoole is going to give a suggestion of why he thinks this work disappears completely. He's saying that it had been constantly in the hands of the ecclesiastical writers until the 10th or 11th century. So you have this constant reference to it and admiration. Jerome admires and all that, and then it's gone. It disappears. The great celebrity obtained by the spurious Clementine literature threw the early epistles completely into the shade. So now there's this Clementine controversy. Remember, I've told you Rufinus went to the Clementines and then completely rewrote them, made them like a romance, ridiculous parody almost. but there was a lot of still truth they left in there. He left in there, but he kind of changed the pictures of everybody. Anyway, so that Clementine text was controversial. And then he says this: it is not impossible that it is not impossible that means may have been taken to remove from circulation a work which might have been made use of to throw a doubt on the authority of the Clementines. And he's saying, in other words, he thinks somebody removed it completely from circulation, destroyed every copy, even though it was canonical for 1,000 years. We're going to remove it, and nobody will ever see it again. And then he says that this was done there is no direct evidence, but it is difficult otherwise to account for its disappearance. So I'm going to suggest to you that the actual words we're looking at that are being used to replace the suffered martyrdom and remove, which is being done in the modern era, post the discovery of Alexandrinus, is exactly what. That's the portion of the text that was so dangerous that it didn't say that. It said he had passed out of this world naturally. Basically, he went out of this world, and basically that was it. It didn't say he was killed or martyred or anything. And that's what they couldn't stand. And they had to destroy it because it was contrary to the myths they had developed about Paul. And there were all kinds of different myths that had occurred beginning really around the early 400s. Then he goes this way. There is no doubt that the epistle preserved in the Alexandrian manuscript, and they're called the first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, is the one cited by Eusebius and other writers. So that's the other thing he's trying to say is there's no doubt we're talking about what we were handed in 1625 absolutely is the same epistle that these other early writers are all talking about, because they make references that are then found in this document that had been invisible for 500, 600 years by that time. Then he says this: a few quotations which occur in ancient writers are wanting in the existing epistle, but a leaf of the Alexandrian manuscript containing nearly a tenth of the epistle is lost. So there are some references that are saying, I'm quoting First Clement, but they're not in the Clement it survived. So he's saying that's easily explained because we're missing an entire 1/10 of it is missing. So it's not to be unexpected that there might be quotes of a portion that's now missing. But I digress. And then he says, it has been suggested that these quotations may have been taken from the missing portion. So that explains that. Now, here's what I want you to listen to. No Latin or Syriac version of the epistles known to exist, nor have the discoveries of recent times include a single manuscript of the genuine Clementine apostles. So we're going to learn that there are Syriac manuscripts that are discovered apparently after this time, but they're nothing. They're scanty nothingness. And then that means the Latin texts, which were mentioned in the past, don't have anything either. So that's why I'm saying when he's writing this, there's no competition, and now the competition doesn't really exist. If you go look around, what's the Latin? Nobody tells you. Everybody's making a new translation, but they don't tell you they're referencing the Latin or Syriac. No, and the Syriac has nothing. It hasn't like a couple lines. It's nothing. So this is clearly why I'm saying these words that are on the left here, these new words don't exist in the manuscript of the Alexandrinus or anything else. It's made up in the modern era, right in front of our eyes, like magic. And we'll digress. Then he says the text generally considered to be a good one is consequently, listen to this, derived from the Alexandrian manuscript alone, corrected by the numerous quotations to be found in the works of the fathers. So here's the question. Are they going to claim somewhere in the fathers there's some statement that they can then attribute to First Clement? Let's say it's not even a direct quote, but it's enough for them to justify in their minds that they're going to corrupt the text and make it say something it doesn't say. And given their proclivity for this in all other areas, I have a feeling they were very liberally using this little loophole he made. But this is a very tight loophole. So if they made a change, and he doesn't accept any of those changes, okay? He's not going to put anything in. So why did they put stuff in later? So this is all I'm saying is they could have used this little loophole where if there's some letter of the fathers that truly could be traced back to the to millennia ago to this original work, then that would be their justification. So but here's the thing is we're going to show you when you go to the Ante-Nicene Fathers, the Protestants, or you go to the Catholic, they don't give you any footnotes saying where it's coming from. So to me, that's the suspicious part, because the duty of someone who's quoting from the Alexandrinus and translating from it, when there's a variant being used, you should footnote it, because that's what it's normally done. All right, so we'll take. Okay, so here is the Ante-Nicene Fathers. This is Protestant. This is Schaff. This is our team. Okay, so you look at their discussion of what their introduction is about, what they're looking at, and they only mention one manuscript, the Alexandrian. They don't tell you they're looking at anything else. They don't tell you they're finding any variants in the introduction. Now let's go look at the text. Maybe when they're going to show you, now here it is, chapter 5. Suddenly these words appear, suffered martyrdom under the prefix. Thus he, Paul, was removed from the world. Well, that would be radically different than the Alexandrinus. Well, there's a footnote 17 here. So that's the place you need to confess what you're doing. You have a letter quoting First Clement from 300 AD or maybe even later, 800 AD, and it says these words. Then you tell us so we know what you're referring to, because you can't just make up words. But can you? Can you do that? Let's see what they say. Well, 16 is nothing, and they're not referencing 17. And has nothing to do with explaining those words. It's talking about that is under Tigelius and Sabinus in the last year of the Emperor Nero, but something Gellius and Polycletus referred to the others, and both here and in the preceding sentence regarding the words, denoting simply the witness borne by Peter and Paul to the truth of the gospel before the rulers of the earth. I mean, so they're saying there's some vague allusion to them being witnesses, Peter and Paul being witnesses to the rulers of the earth, but nothing about martyrdom of Paul. See, that's missing. So they're aware of the principle I'm telling you, that they should give you some reference to what they're doing, and they're giving you some reference, but they're missing the key portion. Where did these words suffered martyrdom under the prefix come, or the word removed? These are all changes by them, by the modern guys, the modern people, the Schaffs, and whoever did this first. I don't, you'd have to do a whole scientific discovery who came up with this brilliant idea to corrupt the text. And I double checked. I went and took a look at Syriac. Is that possibly what it is? So Holmes mentions there's only a single MS containing the Syriac translation of First and Second Clement. There is at least one additional MS in which the Syriac version of First Clement is found, Birmingham. And when you read the article, there's nothing there. There's no meat there, and nobody's ever. It was translated once, and nobody has paid any attention to it. It doesn't get commented on or anything, and that would suggest to me it just simply confirms the Alexandrinus, so it has no interest to anybody. All right. So this was, and by the way, if you go to earlychristianwritings.com, you are getting the Hoole version. I'm showing you the actual book. This is the book from him. So, and we'll show you the exact page where he quotes from. He's quoting a translation he's made from the Alexandrinus, and it does not have these fraudulent words. Okay, and we'll be right. Okay, and now here is Hoole's work. This is 1872 edition, London, Oxford. I mean, this guy's a top guy, right? So this is chapter 5, and you'll see it's the identical words we've been talking about. Through envy, Paul too showed by example the prize that are given to patience. 7 times was he cast into chains. He was banished. He was stoned, having been a herald both in the east and in the west. He obtained the noble renown due to his faith, and having preached righteousness to the whole world, and have come to the extremity of the west, Spain probably, and having borne witness before rulers, he departed at length out of the world and went to the holy place, becoming the greatest example of patience. Nothing about being martyred. That's how it reads. That's what First Clement. And why is this important? First Clement is written before 70 AD because he's talking about the sacrifices continuing to go on at the temple. So the estimation is he wrote at approximately 67 AD. Paul's death was around 64, 65 AD, and it's a natural one. He would know. And here's something more important. The myth about Paul being executed is it occurred at Rome. Guess who Clement is? The Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome. He lives there. If anyone knew that Paul had been killed, it had to be a guy who runs the church there, if he had been murdered there. And he's telling you he went to the extremity of the empire, Spain, where he always kept mentioning he wanted to go in his epistles and other places. And he died there, a natural death. He went out of the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a sin to die naturally, right? John dies naturally. No one could say that's something shameful. What is shameful is the lies made to make it appear he's done more heroic work than he really did. Right? I mean, don't make him a martyr when he wasn't a martyr. And that's what they've done. They've corrupted this text. Ugh. Now, I want to show you the straight translation by Mr. Bart Ehrman. He did a new translation of the Alexandrinus. This is his paragraph 5, continued on page 45 of his work, The Apostolic Fathers, Volume 1, Loeb Classic Loeb Classical Library. And what do we have? Well, Verse 5, because of jealousy and strife, Paul pointed the way to the prize for endurance. 6, 7 times he bore chains. He was sent into exile and stoned. He served as a herald in both the East and the West, and he received a noble reputation for his faith. He taught righteousness to the whole world and came to the limits of the West, bearing his witness before the rulers. And so he was set free from this world and transported up to the holy place, having become the greatest example of endurance. Again, no martyrdom, no killing, no being executed for having stood up for Christ or anything like that. Just he was set free from this world. Like like we'll one day be set free from this world. Anyway, so that, and this is yeah, so this is Bart Ehrman, page 45 of that book. You can buy that book. It's $9 on in Kindle on Amazon. So you can, anybody can get it and re-verify what I've just said. So what we have is and just so you can see here, it's the understanding it was composed sometimes before AD 70. It's like what I said. There's sacrifice still going on at the temple. He references, so it has to be before 70 AD. So this is considered the oldest document. Listen to this: the oldest document of Christianity, and it was canonical. So think about it. It ranks with the Didache as one of the earliest, if not the earliest, of extant Christian documents outside the traditional New Testament canon. And I think we really should understand this was New Testament canon, and inexplicably it was removed. And I'm going to tell you, I think I know why. Because what my friend David is clinging with clutched fingers around the lies of these books with fraudulent words. They're not really in the text. And the effort, all they could imagine is we can't do anything but destroy every single copy of this book, First Clement, so it dies a death, because otherwise Paul will not have this honor that we've given him ourselves. And we've been giving him this honor for centuries, because the myths were made up in the 300s for the first time, that Paul was this great martyr with Peter and they died the same place in Rome. I mean, you know all these myths, everybody? They're myths. They were myths to sell. Rome was a place where people could go and do reverent prayers and all this stuff. And it was a moneymaker, too, to tell these myths happened at Rome. But it turned out it promoted people visiting Rome to visit the graves and whatever of the apostles. All right, I'm going to take another break. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. And so this all goes back to my first episode or video we did on this, which was when or how did Paul die? And again, I only cared about this for purposes of proving that James did not murder Paul through proxies by getting him in trouble at the temple, having Paul go in there and create a ruckus and get arrested and then sent to Nero to get killed. That's what this horrible movie, in my view, horrible premise of the movie, The Polite Bribe was, which anyone would know is false, because he doesn't die in front of Nero. He was acquitted. It's in Jerome. It's in Eusebius. So I wanted to prove that. And in the course of that, I found this proof was conclusive Alexandrinus. And so there was no exception. There was no manuscripts. And now people are challenging, and I'm showing you there is no manuscript that says these other words that are now being brought up. So the point of this was the first century Clement canon had Clement of Rome, who was considered the Pope or bishop. Really, I would just say he's the bishop. This letter he wrote, First Clement, was rediscovered when in 1628 it was handed to, I think it's Charles I. And in it, it says Paul died in Spain a natural death. He went out of the world at length. Thus, Paul was never killed at Rome, the place where Clement is the bishop who would know whether he was killed there or not. And this refutes all the piles of myth that he died there, was murdered there, and was not hung, but I mean killed there. And we have plenty of evidence. There is a lot of evidence that he was making a missionary journey to Spain. It's in the tradition of Spain. It's in folklore and all kinds of little writings here and there. So it's not, it has probability, has merit to it that is far greater than the lies that have been added to this text after the fact. And then I think in this episode, we've shown you that that not only there is no manuscript, but there were manuscripts actually concocted after the fact, after Alexandrinus came resurrected. They had to try to fraudulently add in the words I've told you about. He was removed. He didn't just depart, and he was and basically he suffered martyrdom. They flat out just added two words, and then he suffered martyrdom in front of various public officials, and then it gives you the absolute confirmation in your mind if you wanted to believe that he died a martyr's death. Well, we are inheriting lies from our forefathers, and they're all over the place. There's the Trinity lies. That's one group of lies. Then we've got the lies about Paul, and it's just unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen, just unbelievable, the ethics of the people. And these were people who were post 1625. These are recent modern Christians did all this, and under the nose of us Protestant texts, the Ante-Nicene Fathers were corrupted. These are corruptions. The people I trusted Mr. Schaff. He wouldn't cheat. He wouldn't lie. He wouldn't put anything in there false. He wouldn't rely upon a translator who was making up stuff and adding it. These are unprincipled additions, unless I'm wrong. So if somebody wants to prove me wrong, please go look it up. See if you can find any manuscript that has any of this language in it. I'll eat my words. I'll come on. I'll do a video saying, well, I was wrong. I relied upon the fact that there is no evidence that I could find that could corroborate it, and people were dismissive of there being anything else to consider. This is it. And in fact, that is what Mr. Hoole says. There is no other evidence to consider. Let's just go. I just want you to see why I'm so strong. He says there's no other evidence except if you can prove there was a quote of the first Clement in the early church. So let me just go show you that. One last time, we'll sign on. Okay, so this is what Mr. Hoole says. This is a screen capture from his book. The text generally considered to be a good one is consequently derived from the Alexandrian manuscript alone, not anything else, corrected by the numerous quotations to be found in the works of the Fathers. So is there any evidence of that? Or has there been evidence since 1872 that came out of another manuscript that has content that covers chapter 5 at this point? If not, there is nothing to refute what I'm saying, and therefore there's only one conclusion you can reach. Somebody fraudulently changed this epistle to make you and poor David believe that Paul was a martyr when he wasn't, and it's a big fat lie. That's the truth. I believe you'll find if you dig into it yourself, and you will be just as disappointed as David's going to be when he reads this newsletter, watches this video, because he's trusting people who don't deserve trust. Then who do you trust? Who do you trust? I say you have to verify everything. I've come to the conclusion that a Christian now has to spend like a huge amount of work to figure this out. They've made this so hard. Now, the one thing I know is I trust the words of the Lord Jesus. Now, they've even corrupted Matthew 19, verse 17. They've corrupted that. They took words out. But ultimately, what they really don't ever do is they don't really change his words. The only one who outrageously did that is the NIV with Mark 9, I think it is, where they added, I think it was 8 words to make him say something he never said. By this, Jesus declared all food clean. No, none of those words are there. None. It is in the King. Just go look at the King James, and that's the correct translation. The NIV added all these extra words to create a principle, so that Jesus would be as apostate as Paul, not realizing making Jesus an apostate, meaning anything where he contradicts the law of Moses, would make him an apostate, subject to a death penalty, and he would righteously have been executed in Jerusalem. So putting words in his mouth that make him a false prophet is wrong. So you see, everywhere you look, these people keep doing these crimes against the word of God. And you are all standing there thinking, I'm the one who's subtracting from the word of God. These people are adding and corrupting and changing. And they're all when you get down to it, they're always desiring to protect Paul. So ultimately what went on here is this epistle was destroyed because it destroyed Paul being a martyr. Hey, we got to destroy every single copy. Get rid of them. It had nothing to do with the fact that the Clementine homilies were going on. Nobody was reading the Clementine homilies in the at that time, 400s. I mean, and they were made a laughing stock. Rufinus made them a laughing stock. If you watched, it's a romance. It's a kind of a silly romance. And he removed Paul's name, so you didn't see that unless you were very astute. And so that's just not an explanation of why this book For the first Clement, this epistle was destroyed everywhere. And I bet you the people who put it in this Bible had no recollection that it was there. It's at the very end. Nobody notices that here's the one last copy that exists in all of the universe that anyone knew about. I mean, literally, there was a wipeout, a complete cleansing of this book. And there it was by accident. It was sitting in the back of the Alexandrinus Bible. Ooh, that's bad. And I'm sure even the people who discovered it in the Alexandrinus Bible didn't want it to be resurrected. It's not something they wanted to see either. Okay. Anyway, I think that's it. David, there's your answer. I'm sorry, the text you cited me isn't valid, so we have to move on. He died a natural death, no dishonor at all. And whatever he achieved in life, we measure by what we can read and see, and not what we imagine. And people give us false depictions of what it was. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Good night. Ciao. Bye.